There are places in the world where the sun does not rise every day, but that winter something different happened. The sky, once alive and golden, became an immense grey wall. And then the sun disappeared. For 60 days, the light did not return. The cold took over everything, the ground, the trees, even people's thoughts. And what once was only winter turned into silence. Among mountains covered in ice and rivers that slept beneath thick layers of snow lived the Narik, a small tribe accustomed to the harshness of nature. But nothing had prepared them for what they were about to face. In the first days, they waited patiently. They said the sun was merely resting, but time passed and that rest became absence. The children began to ask if the day had died, and the mothers no longer knew how to answer. The cold grew stronger and the wind carried strange sounds, as if the very earth were mourning the loss of the light. The elders said that the sun was being tested and that men would be tested too. On an especially dark night, the old man Taruk lit a torch and raised it before everyone. The flame trembled, fighting against the wind, but its faint light illuminated the weary faces of the village. Taruk spoke slowly, with a firm and serene voice. "The sun sleeps, but we are still awake." No one answered, but something changed in that moment. People looked at one another and understood. From that night on, keeping the fire burning would mean more than survival. It would mean faith. And so began the story of the Narik, a people forgotten by time, who learned to find light even when the sky decided to go dark. The first day without the sun brought only strangeness. The second, unease. But when the third dawned shrouded in darkness, the Narik tribe understood that something had changed forever. The night would not end. The sky was a grey, motionless stain, and the cold, which once slept when day was born, now remained always awake. People tried to keep the rhythm of life. They lit fires, tended to the animals, prepared food, but soon they discovered that time itself had ceased to exist. Without light, there was no morning or afternoon, only the same shadow repeating endlessly, like a memory that never ends. In the center of the village, Taruk walked in silence. Each step sank into the snow up to his knees. He looked toward the horizon, but there was no horizon, only white and wind. The main bonfire burned weakly. The wood was damp and the flames bent like someone trying to resist death. Taruk's eyes reflected that same fire, tired yet steady. Behind him, dozens of faces watched, waiting for an answer no one knew how to give. Then he spoke in a low voice, but firm enough to pierce the cold. "As long as the fire breathes, we too shall breathe." And there, the first pact was born. Keeping the fire burning became a sacred act. Men took turns keeping watch through the nights. Women gathered moss and dry branches, and children blew softly on the embers to revive the warmth. Hours lost their names. Each flicker of the fire was a hope. Each crackle of the wood, a prayer. Lyra, a young woman with deep eyes, stitched clothing from hardened hides near the doorway of her cabin. She said each stitch was a plea for the sun to return. And sometimes, while she sewed, she would hum an ancient melody inherited from her grandmother, a song that spoke of light and patience. The sound of her voice drifted through the houses and mingled with the wind. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but enough to remind the Narik that there was still soul among them. The children, once frightened, began gathering near the fire to listen to stories. Taruk told them about the time when the sun descended each day upon the valley, and how the gods had entrusted men with the duty of keeping the warmth alive within their chests. With each word, the weary eyes of the tribe regained a new brightness. Without realizing it, the old man had created a new light, not the one from the sky, but the one born of unity. However, not everyone endured. With the constant cold, some fell ill, others gave in to exhaustion. And when one's body could no longer endure, Taruk asked that they be placed near the fire, so they would depart seeing flames, not darkness. Time moved on, slow and relentless. And in the midst of that eternal night, the Narik tribe discovered that the true enemy was not the cold nor hunger, but forgetting. It was necessary to remember why they fought, to remember that the light could return, and above all, to remember one another. That is why, whenever the fire seemed to weaken, Lyra would sing, and Taruk, even without strength, would repeat the same words that now echoed like an oath: "As long as the fire breathes, we too shall breathe." Weeks went by, and the cold, once a visitor, became the master of the land. Ice covered the doors, the windows, and even people's thoughts. Every breath left as a small white cloud and vanished before it could fill the air. The trees began to creak from within, splitting silently as if the whole world was slowly breaking apart. The Narik learned to walk without making noise, because the wind carried away every voice. One morning, Lyra tried to call out to a child who was wandering away from the cabin. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The wind took her words before they could exist. She looked at her own trembling hands and felt the invisible weight of silence. That day, no one spoke. It was as if even the tribe's language had frozen. Only the fire whispered, with small crackles that seemed to say, "I'm still here." Tarek sensed that something was changing inside the people. It wasn't just fear, it was weariness. The absence of sound was erasing their memories. Without voices, their stories vanished. And without stories, there was no soul. Then on a night when the wind howled like a wounded animal, Lyra did something no one expected. She began to sing. Her voice came out faint, like a thread of light piercing through the ice. But little by little, the sound grew. It was a simple melody, repetitive, as if calling the sun back home. The eyes of some filled with tears. No one had cried in a long time. The song traveled between the houses, slipped through the cracks of frozen windows, and reached the fire in every cabin. There, the flames seemed to grow, responding to the song. Taruk stood up, leaning on his staff, and stepped out of the main cabin. The wind pushed against the old man, but he kept walking toward the center of the village. There, under absolute darkness, he could hear the sound of hope. More people began to sing, men, women, children, each in a different tone. There was no harmony, no rehearsal, but there was faith. The cold kept blowing, but now there was something stronger in the air: life. For a few minutes, it seemed even the wind stopped to listen. The village, wrapped in twilight, became a choir of breath and courage. And in that moment, the Narik understood something the sun could never teach: that light is not born only from fire, it is born from the voice. When the singing ended, no one wanted to break the silence. It was a different silence now, not of fear, but of peace. Taruk looked at Lyra and whispered, "You have brought back the sound, daughter of ice." Lyra smiled, and for the first time in weeks, the old man believed that perhaps the sun had heard them too. On the 40th night, the wind arrived with fury. It was not the same wind as before. It was another, heavier, crueler one. It blew as if trying to tear away everything that was still alive. The cabins trembled. Snow slammed against the walls like tiny stones. The fires in the smaller huts were the first to go out. Then, those near the river. And soon, only the great central bonfire remained. The Narik gathered around it, wrapped in cloaks soaked with ice. The fire flickered weakly, on the verge of surrender. And fear, the one that had long slept deep in their souls, awoke. Taruk approached the dying flame. His eyes reflected its unsteady glow, as if a part of him were also fading away. He knelt in the snow and covered the embers with his bare hands. The heat burned, but he did not move. "If this fire dies, we will die with it," he murmured. Lyra, watching in silence, ran to the old man with a handful of dry moss. Others followed behind, bringing whatever they had: pieces of wood, cloth, even the strings from their tools. One by one, they threw the objects onto the embers. The flames wavered. Then they took a deep breath, and like someone awakening from a faint, they came back to life. Heat spread, faces lit up, and a cry of relief mingled with the wind. For a moment it seemed the sun had returned, but not in the sky. It burned there among them. Taruk kept his hands over the fire until his skin cracked. Lyra took his arms and tried to pull him away, but he smiled. "There is no pain when you warm a people," he said in a hoarse and steady voice. The fire roared like a reborn beast. Light spread across faces covered in tears and soot, and the eyes of each person seemed to carry a spark of the same glow. That night, no one slept. They sang, they fed the fire, and took turns keeping it alive until dawn, even if dawn never came. Lyra watched Taruk in silence. The old man sat motionless before the flames, his hands wounded, his gaze distant. He seemed to be speaking with something invisible, something only those who have lived long can understand. Outside, the wind began to ease, and when the first silence fell, Taruk lifted his eyes to the dark sky and whispered, "Now the cold knows it cannot defeat us." The people looked at one another, and for the first time since the sun had disappeared, someone laughed. The laughter was brief, timid, but real, because that night, the Narik tribe discovered that the flame keeping them alive was no longer only in the fire, it was within them. Time had ceased to exist. No one knew whether it was the 40th, 50th, or 60th day. The nights were all the same, and the fire was the only clock that still marked the passing of hours. But that morning, if it could still be called morning, something changed in the air. The wind stopped. The silence was so deep that one could hear the sound of ice melting on the rooftops. Lyra was the first to feel it. She stepped out of her cabin, shielding her eyes with her hands. The sky, for the first time in months, seemed lighter. A pale streak appeared on the horizon, so thin that many thought it was just a reflection of the fire. But it wasn't. It was light. Faint, distant, but real. She called the others. Taruk rose with difficulty, stumbling toward the outside. The air felt different, as if a promise were about to be fulfilled. Little by little, everyone came out. Men, women, children. Their faces pale and marked by the cold, their eyes shining like mirrors of snow. And then it happened. A golden line tore through the horizon. At first, timid, then stronger, until it became a beam that pierced the frozen valley. The sun had returned. The whole tribe stood still. No one spoke. Some laughed, others cried. Tears froze as they fell, but no one cared. Taruk lifted his face and closed his eyes. For an instant, everything stopped. The warmth of the sun touched his skin, and that simple touch was worth all the days of darkness. Lyra took his hand and whispered, "You were right. The sun was only sleeping." The old man smiled. He looked around and saw the children running, the people embracing one another, and the fire still burning in the center of the village. That flame, which had endured cold and fear, now reflected the very light of the sky. The ice began to give way along the riverbanks. The sound of flowing water once more made many weep. It was like hearing the heart of the earth beating again. The sun rose slowly, and its golden tones touched the houses, the trees, the faces. Everything seemed to breathe again. The village, which for so long had lived under the shadow of night, was now bathed in the promise of a new time. Taruk raised his staff and spoke, his voice hoarse but firm. It was not the sun that returned. It was we who brought it back. The words lingered while the wind, now gentle and warm, danced around the fire. That day, the sun shone brighter than ever, and every gaze lifted toward the sky carried the same thought. Light may drift away for a time, but it never disappears completely. When the sun rose fully for the first time, no one ran into their homes. No one sought shade. They all remained still, offering their faces to the light like those who give thanks without words. The warmth was timid, but it was warmth. And wherever it touched, memory awakened. the scent of dry wood, the sound of running water, the true color of skin beneath the winter. Taruk stood before the bonfire. His hands, still marked by the night of the storm, seemed different under the daylight. Not wounded, but written. Lines that told how an entire people had stayed alight within, even when the world outside went dark. Lyra approached with a small clay bowl filled with clean water, drawn from the river's first thaw. She dipped her fingers and touched the old man's hands, washing them gently, like one who consecrates an altar. He looked at her, and for an instant, time was ageless. "What have you learned?" asked Taruk, his voice calm. "That light may fall asleep outside, but it doesn't have to sleep inside," Lyra replied. The village began again, without haste. They opened the cabin doors, shook out the furs, hung their tools in the sun, and cooked thick soup in kettles, not out of need, but in celebration. The children ran to the riverbank, laughing at the murmur of the water, as if it were a newly invented song. The men watched the glimmer on the leaves and in each other's eyes. The women spread the laundry, and the gentle wind returned its shape. Taruk walked with his staff to the highest point of the village. From there, he could see the whole valley opening its eyes. The light descended like a mantle, folding over mountains, touching rooftops, resting upon tired shoulders. He raised his amber necklace and let the sun pass through the stone. Golden reflections appeared on the snow, tiny as seeds. "Keep this," he said, pointing to the dots of light. "Not in your hands. Here," and he touched his chest. Silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of understanding. For there, in the returning brightness, they all understood that they had not been saved by the day, but by the decision to remain together when the day was gone. The fire, the song, the hands that took turns through the night, the timid laughter after the storm, all of it had built a home within, a home the darkness could not destroy. Lyra began to sing again. This time, her voice did not ask. It gave thanks. The melody crossed the valley and mingled with the sounds of things awakening. Water, birds, footsteps. And whoever heard it felt their body lighter, as if they had found themselves again. By the end of the morning, the central fire was fed one last time before being allowed to fade naturally. Not from neglect, but from trust. They no longer needed to watch the flame constantly to remember who they were. The flame had changed its place. Taruk sat on the same log from the first day without the sun, his staff at his side, his hands clean, his face lined with the marks time had drawn with respect. He looked up at the clear sky and spoke without raising his voice. The sun did not abandon us. It taught us the way back inward. The phrase lingered in the air like the last snowflake before the thaw. Then it dissolved into the light, and so life resumed its old rhythm, which now felt new. There were repairs to be made, fields to visit once the ground allowed, stories to be written so that the children's children would know. In the memory of each one, 60 days formed a single lesson, simple and complete. When everything we know goes dark, it is the hand that reaches for another that lights the first match. By afternoon, when the shadows stretched once again across the village, no one felt afraid. They lit small torches, not from necessity, but from gratitude, lamps to remember what must never be forgotten. Lyra placed the clay bowl beside the now low fire and whispered as if speaking to the earth itself. "Thank you for keeping us when we no longer knew where the light was." Taruk closed his eyes, let his face rest in the warm breeze descending from the mountains, and smiled. Somewhere within him, in the very place where the fire had almost died, a serene brightness remained lit. And throughout that village spread a certainty that would endure for all winters to come. The sun may disappear from the sky for 60 days, but there is no night strong enough to overcome what the heart chooses to illuminate. When the first night arrived after the return of the light, the Narik extinguished their torches for a single minute. They stood in silence, side by side, feeling the gentle weight of the darkness. And before relighting the fire, someone said, no one knew who, "Now we know. If the light ever fades again, we know the way. The flames rose once more, calm and steady. The sky above held enough stars for everyone, and the tribe fell asleep as those who keep within every heart a small sun. If this story touched your heart, light a flame in the comments, because every word here keeps alive the light that once almost went out. And remember, the strongest light is the one no one sees. If you felt this message, leave your like. It will help this flame reach other hearts, and subscribe to the channel to walk with us through more stories that illuminate the most human part within us.